So, one of my absolute favorite topics that I get to lecture on in modern to contemporary art is feminism. I got to see Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party when I was in or in Brooklyn last. And I really couldn't fathom exactly the impact it would make on me in terms of its impression, in terms of the voice that Judy Chicago uses to leave a lasting impact on the viewer. So I'm going to explain it to you the way I saw it, and hopefully someday you'll get to go see it, because it's one of those pieces that unless you actually see it, it's a little bit hard to really understand the impact. I can tell it to you, but it's like explaining to somebody what it's like to stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon. You can tell someone, but they're not really going to understand unless they're there. All right, so Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party is an installation that has 3 parts. The first section is a part in which the viewer walks a path, and above their heads are these banners that talk about women's rights. And then you enter a room that's cased off in black glass, and this table sits there. The table is an equilateral triangle, and each side is 48 feet long. She titles the work of art The Dinner Party, and this is why. There is a white tile floor that an equilateral triangle sits on top. And on the white tiles, there are names of women. In fact, 1,038 names of women in history who made an important impact in the history of feminism, or just in history in general. There are 39 women represented in the equilateral triangle. Those 39 women, some are fictitious, some are real people, others are mythological characters. The 39 women that are represented in the place settings on the table are represented through a personalized place setting. The place setting communicates what the woman did in our society that contributed to women's rights. So I'm going to show you an image of a place setting. Each place setting was hand sculpted out of ceramic, including the knife and the fork and the chalice, I believe. The plate itself has a likening to the female genitalia, and it was meant to do so. It was meant to unmistakably mark that place setting as being feminine. And each place setting has sort of a table mat that has the name of the woman embroidered on the front of the runner. As the viewer goes by, they can see the name of the woman that the place setting represents. This one is Georgia O'Keeffe. Georgia O'Keeffe, obviously the famous painter who was recognized for her floral paintings, but more than just that, she was sort of a mover and shaker. She was married to Stieglitz. When they got divorced, she moved out west by herself without a care in the world, really. She moved out west and decided she was going to spend her lifetime painting and studying the vegetation out west. And so the fact that she did this at a time in America's history where women were not able to be as independent was something that I believe Judy Chicago wanted to harness or wanted to highlight in her work of art. Emily Dickinson is a fictional character from a book. The book was set in the 1800s, and so you can see the Victorian lace is very frilly. It's somewhat flat because lace isn't a thick object. It, again, bears that sign of the female genitalia, and you see her name embroidered across the front of her table placemat / runner. Once again, all the utensils are hand sculpted in ceramic, and the embroidery is really beautiful. This is Virginia Woolf's plate. Cynthia Freeland's book on the topic of feminine art said, the dinner party celebrated the female bodily experiences by linking visual representation to text that conveyed women's power and achievement rather than passivity and availability. You can see that Virginia Woolf's flower is a little bit more modern looking. It has definitely that representation of the female genitalia. Okay, so the floor. I told you that there were 999 names on the floor. They were done in some sort of glazing material so that when the tile was glazed, it was a permanent part of the tile. The names are drawn in black, and they are names of women. When you combine the 999 names of the women on the floor plus the amount of plates that represent the women in the banquet on the banquet table itself, there are 1,038 women represented. This is Sojourner Truth's plate. Obviously, someone who is historically prominent. She capitalizes on the fact that Sojourner Truth was a slave and that she freed many, many slaves. Judy Chicago uses the African masking traditions to highlight that. You can see the beautiful patterning around Sojourner Truth's table runner. And I would say her plate is one of them that doesn't really focus as much on the genitalia aspect, but it shows a more, I suppose, just a less prominent viewpoint of that. All right, so I told you the piece is an installation that has 3 sections. We just looked at the table section. Now we're looking at the last section that you encounter whenever you see this work of art. There are 7 heritage panels that are large scale and hand colored. They are photo and text collages that range in size from 57.5 inches to 107 inches. They portray the lives of mystical and historical women whose names are inscribed in the heritage floor of the dinner party. Judy Chicago, with the help of a team of researchers, selected 999 women from prehistory to the 20th century when she did this particular project. The heritage panels have biographical information on them, major contribution information, and history information of the women that were highlighted in this work of art by Judy Chicago. Here she contextualizes the legacies of these women through these heritage panels. um, and describes the circumstances in which women had to struggle for equality through history. So, Cindy Sherman is one of my favorite feminist artists. I had the pleasure of seeing a retrospective of her work maybe 2 or 3 years ago at the Wexner Center for the Arts. It was the largest retrospective I have ever seen of Cindy Sherman's work. And I learned a lot about Cindy Sherman while I was seeing her work. She was always interested in experimenting with different identities, and her art involves her taking selfies. So she'll set up an elaborate costume, she'll put on prosthetics, and she shoots on a green screen. So as you can see here, she's shooting on a green screen, and then she can manipulate the background. She said she was always interested in dressing up. She said, I wish I could treat every day as Halloween and get dressed up and go out into the world as some eccentric character. She moved to New York, and when she moves to New York, she produces film stills that, in which she puts on disguises using prosthetics and makeup and various different settings. And she creates scenes from the mid-20th century, so the 1950s, 1960s. And she's referencing B movies when she starts this. Her photography career started when she was 23. And that particular run, she ended up with 70 film stills. They became flashpoints of conversation about feminism, postmodernism, representation, and they made her very famous. This would be one of those film stills that she did. This film still's backstory is that this small town girl grew up in a rural area and moves to New York City. And so you see her here being photographed as someone who is a young professional in New York. The photographs that she takes in this particular series, there are 70 of them. And she uses the stereotypes of female, she uses stereotypes that affect females as inspiration for her works of art, or for her images. The stereotypical portrayal of the working girl, the housewife, the lonely housewife, the vamp, the generic female film characters that producers tend to develop. And so she prints the images, tries to mimic the format of the B-movie film producers' formats, and she ends up with a very successful body of 70 pictures that are still considered some of her best work to date. This is another one of those stills. Some of her work is disturbing. It's distressful. It's exposing the stereotypes that women go through. She not only is the photographer, but she's the makeup artist. She's the costume set designer. She is the one who does the staging from start to finish, and the production of the background and the setting and all of that. She's the hairdresser. She's the wardrobe stylist. She works with an arsenal of wigs and costumes. And she ends up with images that are eloquent, provocative, and explore the construction of contemporary identity of the nature of representation of women. They explore the ideas that society have about women and the typical tropes that are part of the labels that society creates for women. This one is from her hip hop project, and you can see she's wearing a wig. She's wearing one of those track suits that were popular in the 90s with moms. And she's exploiting the fact that the mom was the prom queen in high school. And so she talks about those stereotypes. The photographs lend a story to them, all just based on the iconography of the costuming and the makeup and the basically the iconography of the costuming, the makeup automatically puts the narrative in a certain time period, in a certain era, and what those implications about women say from that area and from that time period. So another one of my favorite groups is the Guerrilla Girls. They're an anonymous group of feminists. They are self-described feminist activist artists. And they fight against sexism and racism, specifically in the art world. They formed in New York City in 1985, wanting to bring gender and racial equality in the greater art communities. The group uses culture, popular culture, in their posters to expose discrimination and corruption. They wear masks that are gorilla masks to hide their identity, to maintain some anonymity. The reason they use disguises is because they feel like their message is clearer when their identity is hidden. Basically, they say they want to focus on the issues and not their personalities or their work. So even though they want to focus on the issues at hand, their art is art, in fact. And you can see that it has all the same elements that any other work of art has. It has rhythm, it has movement, it has color composition, all of the things that we analyze in formal elements in art. This particular one is a spoof on Ingres' The Grand Odalisque from the Louvre. And you can see how they use the pink color to carry your eye through the composition and up to the gorilla head, where the main message is, do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum? Basically calling out the inequality of women artists to men artists that are featured in the Louvre. About their art, they say that they are feminist activist artists. We wear gorilla masks in public and use facts, humor, and outrageous visuals to expose gender and ethnic bias, as well as corruption in politics, art, film, and pop culture. We believe in intersectional feminism that fights discrimination and supports human rights for all people and all genders. This particular work by them is one of their posters in which they list some of the negativity or challenges that women have in the world of art. The art has an interesting rhythm because of the way the type is placed. You can see the rotation of the black and white in between the letters, which creates a visual image. Type here is a visual image. This particular group has been an inspiration for other groups like Fierce Pussy, groups that maybe have a different angle on a social activist issue, but they are people that have desire to expose social activist issues through their art, and the Guerrilla Girls have been inspiration for groups like Fierce Pussy, who happened to be at CCAD last year in the spring. Barbara Kruger is another artist who uses type in order to carry a message. She is a feminist as well. And this particular work of art states, "Your gaze hits the side of my face," is referring to the subject of the male gaze and how that subject of the male gaze has been a thread through art in the history of art. She likes this 3-color signature, the black, the white, and the red. I think partially because newspapers are printed in black and white, she adds the red to give us a contrast of bright color to draw attention to the work. She uses type as image. Here in this particular work, you get this nice rhythm of the light and the dark. And then, of course, the contouring of the face that is creating the way that the eye moves around the composition. At times, Barbara Kruger's work is small, like a poster, just like the last slide that you saw. At other times, they are very large installations. This one here is a large installation. I had the privilege of seeing one of these types of rooms that she had designed when I was at the Hirshhorn Museum last year in Washington, D.C. She uses the type as a way to create an image. The type has a sense of rhythm to it because it's the background is white and the type is black, or vice versa. And so those negative spaces between the letters end up being a visual image, which helps to pull your eye through the message. In the same way, the rotating black and white stripes helps to create movement of the image. And the type doesn't have any other image with it but what it says. And so in order for Barbara Kruger to make her statement, she needs you to read the words and process them. You end up becoming a participatory part of the art of the activism. And of course, for some reason, I had to end this section of feminism with Cindy Sherman. This is an example of how she deals with the male gaze. here. This is one of those film stills that she created uh, in the early time of her work. It is one of those 70 film stills that we talked about. They're black and white, and they are based off of the Bee movie, and they show how women were portrayed, how women lived, what the stereotypes were that they lived with during the 1950s.